the dollar, as we have come to know it, at least since 2008 onwards, is over. That period of the dollar is gone. And I think that is what gold and silver are telling you. They're not telling you inflation is coming. They're telling you we don't know how the next Fed chair will behave. Therefore, we have no idea where bond yields are going and where the dollar policy is going. We rather go to what is very reliable: gold and silver. We don't have to think. We don't have to know anything. For 5,000 years, it's been the same thing, and that's what we want. We want that diversification into our portfolios.
Echo 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. Well, today I have the pleasure of speaking with Lior Gantz. He's the editor and founder of the Wealth Research Group, and I wanted to get Lior's view on what's been going on this year with the markets, the economy, the Fed, and what he sees going forward. Lior, it's great to have you on the channel. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Doing
Great.
great.
Great. Yeah. You asked me before you started what's up, and I said, well, gold and silver are up.
Exactly. Yeah.
So maybe you want to start with the Federal Reserve. We recently had the FOMC meeting. They cut rates as expected, but they announced something that seems to be triggering some kind of move in the precious metals. They announced that they're going to do 40 billion in the next month of reserve management or not QE. So I wanted to get your view on that first.
Yeah, I think what really transpired on this meeting that happened on the 10th of December is two main things that the Fed changed their view on. But I think that the real big, huge catalysts are going to come in 2026, and they're going to be irreversible and um, effectively change the way that the Fed operates at all. Going back to 2 days ago, I think what really happened is that Powell, for the first time, acknowledged that the tariffs are not inflationary as he originally thought, and that view has been shared now by more Fed governors because you see that the decision to lower by 25 basis points was very disputed. There was a lot of different ideas within the Fed board as to that final decision. And so what Powell basically acknowledging that the tariffs have not created this runaway hot inflation is really important because on the flip side, he has, by his own actions, started buying short-term treasuries. Buying short-term treasuries is a real big sign that the Fed has realized that it's too tight on its policy, but it doesn't want to fully acknowledge their mistake because that would mean that Trump was right all along. So instead of cutting 50 basis points, they effectively cut 50 basis points by adding this treasury management, and because that's like an additional 0.25% if you think about it. And so that's what you're seeing. The markets are reading into this. They're understanding that effectively the Fed is saying, hey, the scare of inflation is gone, and we will be able to start cutting rates. That plays really well into housing, which is the sector that's most hurt in the United States. That's really good for loans in general. And what I think it really opens the door to is that this reindustrialization is going to continue in earnest in 2026 and broaden the bull market in equities from just the tech sector to the main economy, which is really the big change that Trump has brought with him to this term. He brought it in the last year and a half of the first term, but this now you will see it really playing out.
I listened to the press conference the other day, Jay Powell, and he said that most of or all of the guys and girls, I guess, on the FOMC admitted that inflation is still too high, and still they cut. And I know that tariffs haven't yet translated to higher prices. It could take a while for importers to pass through the costs and companies to pass through the cost. But don't you think that gold and silver are telling us that they're seeing the danger of inflation continuing? And do you think the Trump administration would rather have a little bit of inflation rather than very low inflation and a weak economy? Because I don't see. Yeah, from what gold and silver are doing, in my opinion, I see that savers are going to be like, yeah, it's going to be tough for savers, especially bond savers. I think they're not going to get a real return, but maybe that's the price. Yeah, Trump is willing to pay. I don't think politicians, they'd rather have inflation than deflation. Is that the way you see it?
Um, no, I don't. I think, well, you had a lot of stuff in there, but what I want to open your mind to is this idea that the Fed um, has controlled uh, the US economy since 2008, much more than the government has. Monetary policy was far more important than fiscal policy. Um, and you saw that moving in unison when the Fed cut to zero. All central banks cut to zero around the world, save for Japan and Switzerland and economies that are very isolated in that regard. Now you're seeing a shift. The shift is away from monetary policy is the leading as the leading financial indicator and creator of booms and busts, and it's moving towards government. Government takes a big precedence. The reason is when we think about what economic theory for the Fed is, it's really easy to understand it. When the economy is slow, they cut interest rates. When the economy is hot, they jack up interest rates. That is a fundamental thing that Greenspan, Bernanke, Yellen, Powell, they all say the same thing. There's a risk here to unemployment. We're going to cut rates. There's a risk that it's too tight, and we're going to raise rates. Trump comes in and says, okay, I don't understand this. For the entire decade of the 2010s, we had zero interest rates and no inflation. No inflation. Literally every meeting, they were targeting getting to the 2%, but they were shy of it. And we can debate whether or not that it's fudged up numbers, etc. But the government numbers were not showing 2%. So his idea and his vision, and it will transpire and it will come to pass, is that there's no reason to think that when GDP is 4 or 5%, that you have to instantaneously put the brakes on the economy. Why? Why would you put the brakes on the economy? Why is it that you won't let interest rates stay and remain low if the economy is working well? If the economy is working well, this can expand. If it expands into more and more sectors, then that will swallow up any problems with overheating because it will expand organically. And that is what I think will come to pass in 2026, especially after the new Fed chair. The entire leadership, the baton of what will move the economy and markets is moving away from the central bank and back into the treasury and to the into fiscal policy much more than monetary policy. So I think that basically Powell is running out his clock and his shift. The next Fed chair is going to change the entire way that he communicates with markets. Um, and that's really important because the US will be a standalone central bank in that regard. It's not like the ECB will immediately change its ways or other central banks. And that is a big uncertainty that the market has taken into effect. That the Fed from now on will behave differently than it has, at least for the last 16 years since 2008. And that decoupling is what I think the markets are sensing And that is effectively what they're telling you with the prices of gold and silver. What they're telling you is the fake economic theory or the artificial economic theories of the central banks. And these are all new terms. Everything that you've heard since 2008 onwards are all new terms that if the past Fed governors that are now deceased will come back from the grave and they will hear all these new terms, they will not be familiar with them. They will say, we were not central bankers like this. This is a new profession, new theories, new everything. This is not classical central banking. And I think that's really important to understand. Trump wants to go back to common sense. Common sense means that the US economy is the biggest in the world, it's the safest in the world, therefore it should pay the lowest interest rates in the world. That's very common sense thinking. And that's where this is going. Therefore, other countries are not going to be able to rely on the dollar as much as before. This monetary system that's very predictable, very dollar centric, is ending. The dollar will not be used as a currency that helps the global economy. It will be used as a currency that helps the US economy. And that is why other central banks are buying gold and silver. They're buying gold, and silver is bought more by the retail investor, because the dollar, as we have come to know it, at least since 2008 onwards, is over. That period of the dollar is gone. And I think that is what gold and silver are telling you. They're not telling you inflation is coming. They're telling you we don't know how the next Fed chair will behave. Therefore, we have no idea where bond yields are going and where the dollar policy is going. We rather go to what is very reliable: gold and silver. We don't have to think. We don't have to know anything. For 5,000 years, it's been the same thing, and that's what we want. We want that diversification into our portfolios, especially governments. But now you see retail investors, especially in Asia, adding into this. And I wrote a special report for your viewers, especially about Silver 2026, which you can download exclusively at wealthresearchgroup.com/2026 silver or 2026 silver. If you go to that landing page and download that report, you'll understand that we are really in a seismic shift in the way that the central bank is based in the U.S. economy. As you know, the central bank is a Democratic Party idea. It came into fruition during Woodrow Wilson's term. Woodrow Wilson was the first statist progressive president that ran on the platform that the Constitution was good for those founding fathers, but not for us luminaries and progressives, and we have ways to reform it. And they came up with the Federal Reserve, they came up with the central bank, they came up with the income tax, and a bunch of they were the ones that thought it would be prudent for the U.S. to engage in wars in the old continent, etc., etc. Those are not ideas shared by Donald Trump or his administration, and certainly not by this Treasury Secretary. And I think those changes, you will see them unapologetically happening in 2026. We are really in a counter-revolution. And I think that is what you're seeing with gold and silver.
Yeah, one thing you mentioned there, and I kind of agree with, because it doesn't make sense. And I think it doesn't make sense because it's a Keynesian philosophy, and the Keynesians always pump the economy through the central bank with easy money and credit, and that artificially grows the economy because people are borrowing and spending and no one's producing, and that's why they have to raise rates. But from what you tell me, is that we're going to shift towards an economy where it's more balanced, there's more production. Yes, there's credit, but people will have to earn their way. And I guess if the economy is growing by 4 or 5%, that's a good thing. There's more supply of stuff because the Austrian school, they say that for every consumer, there needs to be a producer as well. While the Keynesians, they just want consumers, and that doesn't make sense. So that seems to
I
me
agree.
to make sense. The second thing, and it's more of a question now that you can follow up on, from what you told me, then the Fed is going to become kind of redundant. What are they really going to do if fiscal policy and the Treasury are going to be running the economy, so to speak?
Well, Mario, it's a phenomenal question, and I want to, if I have time for a longer answer, I want to really explain how Trump views the United States, um, because he has come into office, especially after the 2021 election loss, with the idea that if he runs again, he wants to completely turn the ship back to um, back to the way that America works. So when Trump looks at anything, it's from a first principles perspective. It's almost like if, let's say, he didn't have a cabinet and advisors and anything, he just had Grok or Gemini or ChatGPT. He asks the most open, basic questions. For example, when was our republic the richest? That's it. He doesn't come with it with an agenda or anything like that. When were we the richest? That answer is between 1870 and 1910. That is when tariffs were the only source of revenue for the government. They were so rich that they didn't know what to do with the surplus. That's when they started the national parks and things that before they weren't, they didn't have enough treasury to do. Um, and when he looks at when the United States started to go downhill, he points to a book that he read recently about the four horsemen of the statist progressive republic. And what happened after the Civil War, because of that trauma of the Civil War, all the scholars in the United States in the 1870s and 1880s, they went to Europe to study because there was very limited higher education in the United States, like second degree, etc. That was actually where you are. That was where it was the highest standard in London and in Europe. When they went to Europe in the 1880s and 1890s, they learned that a country of 300 principalities united into one giant industrial mighty power, and they were like, Germany is the new model. They brought that idea that Germany is a beautiful model into the United States. They brought it back to Minnesota, by the way. That's why Minnesota is the most progressive of all the states, because they have 120 years of that culture in them. And what they thought was, here is this Germany, this industrial powerhouse run by a very powerful managerial class. Okay? This managerial class is above the politicians because they're professionals. They don't have to be elected. They can't be corrupted. And that is the original seeds of the deep state in the United States. It didn't start as a deep state. It started from the idea that there can be a class of people that is above the dirty game of politics, and that they can run the economy and everything better from above. They know better. That's why they reformed the Constitution. That's why they introduced all these new agencies to government, and effectively they banned alcohol later on, etc. Because they know better for you. Trump doesn't believe that at all. And so he wants to go back to the period before 1901, before Theodore Roosevelt first came to power and started to reform the Constitution and the federal government. In that idea, there is no Fed. There is no Fed before 1913, certainly before 1901. The idea isn't even thought about until 1908, after the bank crisis, where they sent a party into Europe to see how they run their economies. And that's when they came from they came back with this idea of a central bank. The central banks came from Sweden originally, and they were never an American idea. So when you're asking if the Fed is going to become redundant, I don't know if it will become redundant. It will become much less independent. That independence of the Fed is a Democrat hoax. It's just a way of creating a situation where you take power away from the elected president and from the Treasury Secretary into a progressive, non-elected managerial bureaucracy, a bank. And so that idea of, hey, we have to keep this independence of the Fed, that is actually a stupid idea if you think about it. You don't want it to be independent. You want it to work with the government as long as you think that the government is working for the people. So I think that you're not going to have it redundant, and you probably will not have it abolished because the public is just not ready for that. But you will have it working in tandem, in unison, together with the government. The reason I say that is because you can see that in anything else that Trump does. When Trump wants anything done, it's a bottoms up approach. In other words, AI. How does he think about AI? Does he think about it like an Obama, like a Clinton, like a Bush, like presidents before him? No, he doesn't think he has answers and then comes up with them and then creates policy and tells the market about it. He tells Elon, Jensen Wang, Michael Dell, he tells the best people, come to the White House, let's have a round table, let's hear what you need, and we will see how we can help you achieve that. Everything is a bottoms up approach where the government assists the private sector. What we had in the US for a very long time before him is very much like the Chinese model, where the CCP calls the banks and says, hey, next year you need to lend 20% of your loans to robotics companies because that's a national priority. They call all the companies. They say, "Hey, 20% of your R&D spend needs to be on robotics." That's a top-down approach, and we had that in the United States for too long. That creates a very concentrated economy at the top, and the end result of that is that many people feel capitalism doesn't work for them, and it's because it's not capitalism. Now we're going back to capitalism. The reason that silver is up to 64 an ounce is because the world is healing. It's going back to normal. That is the normal price for silver to be up there. For it to trade for 12 or 13 or $14 an ounce when the entire community of stackers tells you that cannot be. We know our stats. We know how this market works. We know how much is being leveraged by the banks on the COMEX. We know all that. Why isn't it transpiring? And it was because everything was fake. Now that everything is getting restored back to common sense and normalcy, silver is going to 64 and it's going much higher. So I think it's to answer your question, we are erasing 124 years of America going from a constitutional republic into a reform state with status and progressives. And at the end of the day, you had really deep state governance, and we're erasing all of that. Now, it will take 20, 30 years to do that. Just like it took 25 years to get to FDR's New Deal. But it's coming. Like that is the trajectory the United States is taking. It's going back as long as they can keep winning in elections and winning with the public. Because as you know, this is not the easy way. The easy way is to promise everything to the people. And they'll vote for you. Like if you promise them free stuff. This is the hard way. This is like roll up your sleeves. We need to go back to this. We can't have this much national debt. We can't have the Chinese running ports in Central and Latin America. This is not the easy road. This is a tough road that he's suggesting. And only when you have an educated public can you sustain those kind of voters. It's not easy because you saw it in 2008. In 2008, literally, what you would have expected is for a presidential candidate to come up and say, "Guys, this what just happened is because we went astray. We need to go back to our way." And instead of that, they went for a person that's anti-American and voted for him. So I think there's a lot of fault with the media because the media just does not report. It basically creates this matrix around the narrative that they want, and all that has to be dismantled. I think it's working, but we'll know for sure in the midterms because in the last 20 elections, the incumbent has won the midterms in 18 of the 20 times. In other words, 18 out of 20, if blue wins presidency, red wins midterms, and vice versa. If you see a shift where the Republicans can win the midterms, it tells you that Americans are willing to pay the price, continue to work hard to revive their republic, and go back to something that's sustainable. Because the other way, obviously, was leading them into a very precarious situation where they will lose effectively what binds them together as a country, and they will become much more like Europe, I would say. No offense.
No, no, that's all right. The thing is, you mentioned that from 1870 to 1910 or 1900, it was when America was the richest. And the other thing that happened that was going on back then was that, let's say, government spending as a percentage, federal government spending as a percentage of the GDP in the US was around 5%, and now it's 40. And I agree with you, it's going to take at least 10, 20 years to get to like steer the tanker the other way.
Absolutely.
So my question, I've got a couple of questions. One is, do you see the government, even though the Treasury is going to be more involved in the economy, do you see the size of government dropping because we can't stay at 40% and because the US has got too much debt? Is that the way you see it too, that eventually government will be pretty small and the economy will be run by the market?
I don't. I think going back to that type of economy where in 1870, if you asked 10 Americans, three would not even know who the president was. It wasn't that important who was in Washington. It was run by the states. The government was more important for your life and the mayor than the federal government. Railroads, which were the big driver of growth in the 1870s, they basically made America for the first time one united economy, and created time zones and everything that you see today. That period, I don't think is coming back. I do think that you and I, especially myself, being 41, all I've learned in the last 30 years is that the government is too big and that it cannot do any good, basically. It needs to go all private. And I think what the federal government is now showing you is that, first of all, you cannot take the federal government of the United States and just shrink it with a chopping board on the chopping board. It will not it's not realistic. What's much more realistic is to have what we have right now, which is a president and a cabinet and an administration that wants to work for the people and effectively create a situation where the government monetizes more of the assets of the country on behalf of the citizens. The vision of Lutnick and Besant, and I think you'll see it in the coming administrations just because it's common sense and it works, is that revenue can go up to a point, right? Taxes can go up to a point, tariffs can go up to a point, but there's so much opportunity on the balance sheet side of the United States. if the government was to um, unfreeze land for development and take an equity stake in that, and then create a sovereign wealth fund for the U.S. Citizens, that changes everything. It's insane that a country like Norway, with 5 million people, has $1 trillion in a sovereign wealth fund, and the United States doesn't even have a sovereign wealth fund. It's insane. All the Emirates have sovereign wealth funds, zero taxes and sovereign wealth funds. The United States has more oil than these countries, have more natural gas, have more offshore. They have coast abundance. They have the middle of the country with the Mississippi River, which is the best highway for transportation in the entire world combined. Just the Mississippi River has more potential than all the other waterways in the world combined. And so the real secret for the future of the United States is to create that other side, that balance sheet side to their government. Because the national debt is 37, 38, 39 trillion, whatever it is today. But if you monetize the assets of the United States, then you will have a sovereign wealth fund of 50 and 60 trillion dollars. That covers the entire national debt. And you can do that. So I think that is what's missing, and that's what the future you will see for the United States. That will make capitalism work for everybody. I assume you're following the Trump accounts, which were just seeded by Michael Dell for $6.25 billion dollars. That's $250 times 250 million children. Or I'm sorry, times 25 million children. And that compounds in the S&P 500. It gets to a point where these children, when they're 18, they will have good savings. And Michael Dell will just be the first one. There will be more philanthropy, more billionaires. If you again go to AI and ask AI, when did the United States have the most philanthropy? They will tell you the same period, 1870 to 1910, when taxes were zero, basically, and there was a lot of wealth created by the industrialists like the Carnegies, the Fords, and everybody else that came and revolutionized the Edisons, and they wanted to help the country. This was part of being an American. In fact, the founding fathers themselves, they were businessmen that took a pause in their business for 4 years, came to Washington, did their civic duty, went back to their regular lives. This idea, like you have today, of Nancy Pelosi and these career politicians that literally have never held a job, they don't know how the economy works, they live and they work only in Washington for their entire lives, that wasn't a thing. You didn't have a politician, a career politician, back in the old days. It was more like I will pause whatever I'm doing, help my country, go back to what I'm doing. Similar to what Sachs, who's the crypto czar, or Scott Bessent that closes hedge fund, came to government, Howard Lutnick, and all these other guys. And I'm sure you'll see more of this in the future. People want to be part of government if the government does good. It's all, at the end of the day, ROI. If the ROI is positive, you can have immense impact in government, positive impact in government. And government can be a force for good. So I think that limited government, small government, everything you're saying, it will happen, but not in the libertarian sense, like a Ron Paul type candidate. It will be more of how can the government and the private sector work together to help everybody and make America work for everybody. Because that's the original idea, and that is possible for the United States. It's possible for them. So I think that's more the trajectory that the country is going, and you can see it with Intel. They're taking a position. They took a position in Intel. They're going to take a lot more positions in companies and in developments. They're going to they're going to unfreeze land, build new cities, and they will get into making money by for the American people by approving projects that work for everybody. I think that is more the way that this is going to go.
So I guess it's not totally going back to 1870, but partly it's kind of a hybrid and
Yeah, I would say
trusting
so.
more in government, which yeah, for me that's a little difficult because
Exactly.
I don't trust government.
Absolutely. And that's what
Uh,
I'm saying, Mario, that we were brought on this idea that if the government intervenes, it's a net negative. And Trump is trying to say, no, no, why am I, a real estate developer, that brought an administration that, Doug Bergrum, he's a billionaire, Scott Bessent, a billionaire, Howard Lutnick, a billionaire. Why would these people that in the private sector made billions, why would they come to government and start losing billions? It doesn't make sense. Why can't we treat the government also like a corporation that wants to make money for its shareholders, which are the people of the United States, in this example? And this can also work. And that is, I think, where we're going with this. If you think about like the 1870s, they had a surplus of money, they didn't know what to do with it. And now he's saying, okay, let's go back to being rich, but also to being smart and knowing what to do with our riches.
I see. I mean, time will tell whether this will
Exactly.
work. I'm not really saying I disagree, but it's an interesting point. And the other risk, though, as well, is political. If even if they did well in the midterms, were they to lose the 2000 and what is it, 28 elections, then everything would go back. So that's the only problem. But before we wrap up, just wanted to tell the viewers I'm going to put a link to Lior's 2026 silver. Is that what it is? The report?
Wealthresearchgroup.com forward
Yeah.
slash
Yeah,
2026
I'll
silver.
put it
Correct.
in I'll put it in the description. Maybe
Thank
you
you.
could, you're welcome. Maybe you could quickly tell us because this year so far, and we've only got a couple of weeks to go, gold and silver performed in a stellar fashion. The miners. Do you think the overall market is going to catch up with gold and silver, or is there still more room for gold and silver and the miners to outperform?
Well, first of all, silver had its second best year ever this year. It's up over 100%. I think 105 now. 1979 was 433%, if I'm not mistaken. But apart from that, it's never had anything similar. It had a 76% year and a 43% year, which were the biggest. Um, I happen to think that it's still under owned and not in a bubble, certainly not in a retail sense. And there are more reasons driving the price up than just retail demand for bullion. As you know, 50% of demand for silver is industrial, and it's because it's the number one conductor of electricity in the world, and is, seriously important for AI and data centers, etc., which are being built around the United States with insane amounts of capex. Um, uh, in general, I think that um, the dollar is still artificially high compared to where it should be in a normal in the economy that Trump is building. This is shared by Stephen Myron, who is the chief economic author of the Trump dollar policy and recently named Fed governor. And I think that what you'll see is that the dollar continues to be very strong as a fiat currency, but its role and usage will continue to go down relative to other fiat currencies. Because if you're forcing Europe to start defending itself, meaning that the national currencies of the euro and any European currency like the Swiss, like the pound, will have to be used much more by the Europeans to build their defenses. You're creating a much less globalized economy and a much more localized economy. Couple that with the rise, insane rise back of Japan as a military force, a country that vowed 50 years to pacifism after World War II, and they have the largest military budget in the world for the next 5 years. Couple that with the rise of Turkey back to being a huge power. I don't know if you've studied Turkey thoroughly, but apart from the United States, the geography of Turkey is the number one in the world. So it's number two in the world after the United States. It is an incredible power that effectively, after 400 years of ruling this entire region, the Middle East, and all the way up to Vienna at one point, they fell apart in 1924. And now, after 100 years of getting back to their confidence and their might, they are now becoming a force again. They have their own currency, as you know. And obviously, the Russians have their own currency, the Chinese, etc. I think the role of the dollar will continue to go down. That really helps the price of gold and silver, if you want to think about it from that perspective. And I don't think that will change anytime soon. So I think that will continue to be very strong. Commodities will continue to outperform. If you talk about the stock market, I think in many ways, we are at the end of a bull market. We still have a few years to go in this bull market, in my opinion, for the general equities. But something that's gonna really impact your appetite to buy U.S. equities, U.S. tech, and the S&P, and everything that was considered in the past decade and a half to be a sure thing, is I think you're going to have every year is going to look like what we had this year. And what do we have this year? We had Liberation Day on April 1st. That plummeted the markets 20%. Then they came roaring back. Can you stand that as a retiree every year for the next few years? Just now, in September, you had the fear and greed index go to 6 or 5, which is COVID-19 level panic. So twice in a year, in a given year, and you still had 51 record highs. Can you stand that? And most people cannot. And that's why I think that the market is not going to play catch up, because you don't have a lot of retail participation in the markets. You have a lot of money in money markets, and a lot of money that is looking for alternatives in other markets, in Europe, in Japan, and other stock markets. And I think that after over a decade of not buying houses, I think that millennials that are just now getting married and forming families are going to put a lot of money into real estate and housing as mortgage rates come down. So I don't think that in the next few years, the general markets, in other words, the S&P 500 or the Nasdaq, will hold with commodities. If you're looking at the commodity index over the Nasdaq, I think that commodities will do better.
Yeah, and I've just been thinking about what you said of this brave new world of that Trump is trying to bring for the economy. And I know China and the US are completely different cultures and political systems, but we have to give the Chinese credit that they brought like 800 million people out of poverty, and they built a great infrastructure. I mean, their economy is really advanced compared to 30 years ago. So it seems to me like this new plan, Trump plan, like took a few pointers from China. Am I wrong? Or because even though they're communists, they've done a lot of good for the people there. Or did they do that because they're scared of like losing power? Am I wrong to say that?
Um, yes and no. Let me give you an example. When Elon was told by the CCP, come build a factory here, he came in good faith. And this is just one anecdotal story, but it goes to tell you the Chinese model in general. Um, what the Chinese do after 5 years of the factory there, they've now learned everything that they can copy, and then they tell them, "Hey, your permit is over. Like, close the shop, and we'll do our own thing." And then they have their own companies. Um, so even though this was a private sector and a government sector operation, so to speak, which is what I'm telling you that the United States is going to have more of, it comes from a different ideology. The Chinese, the CCP, is a culture within the Chinese people that is very new, but the roots of it are are 1,000 years old. The Chinese people in general have not been exposed to the three major religions. And for the most part, the Hans, which are the major cultural group in China for thousands of years, they've relied on the three gushing rivers of China to build their civilization. And for the most part, China has not been one unified block, the whole country. That's very new for a central government to hold the entire thing together from Beijing. Very, very unique. The Hans believe in general that when they have a government or a lord or whatever is governing them, uh, as long as it's going well, then basically the gods are shining on this government. But when things start to go wrong, it means that the gods are pissed at this government and they can revolt. And so every 100 years, they literally butcher their government. There is nothing left of that dynasty. Every 100 years, they break apart. They go back to being separate, and then they consolidate and grow apart and consolidate and grow apart. That is the Chinese way of doing things. And isolationism has always been this bedrock for them. So they need to have everything on their own, and they don't trust other cultures, especially after the Opium Wars. They just see that Westernism as something that if you allow to spread within China, at some point it will turn on you, and you'll lose China, you'll lose this culture. So they're afraid, and just like the West is afraid in the same way of China. And so what I to kind of answer your question is, while from the outside, from a bird's eye view, you're saying, okay, this government is working with the private sector, and this government is going to work with the private sector, so it looks the same. It's a completely reverse situation. Here you have a government dictating to the economy the priorities, and here you have basic priorities, which is what Trump is saying. He's saying, hey, we have basic things that we cannot give away. We cannot give our steel, our medicine, and our oil. We cannot depend on intricate supply chains to feed us. We have to own some things. Some things we have to have in the house, right? And that is effectively the big change that Trump is saying. What he's effectively putting back into Americans' hearts and minds and brains is that, hey, we cannot live in an economy where everything is made outside, and we finance the defense of all the waterways in the world. We keep everything in check as if these are two walls and we are the ones holding them from falling apart. And if we stop, then everything crumbles. We cannot sustain this. Our hands are tired of this. We cannot have this. We have to have other hands holding these walls. Okay? We have to go back to getting strong. We're fatigued. We've tired. We've done this for 80 years. It doesn't work. And the reason is, in the beginning it worked. The US was strong enough and was viable enough and vibrant enough to hold the walls. And every problem that arose, they were able to quelch that Problem. Later, they became decadent and lazy, and they started bribing countries through the USAID, through the deep state to stay quiet. Hey, do you have issues? Okay, how about we give you this or give you that? At some point, the Chinese learned this is a weakness. The US always will choose to bribe their allies and their adversaries into staying quiet. And while the United States was holding the world, China was getting stronger as a result because they were not holding anything. They were making this job even harder. And so Trump is saying, hey, it just doesn't work. Believe me, I'm just the first one who's brave enough to say this. And so um, it is different between China and the United States. Both of them are saying the same thing, that government has to be involved in the solution, but it's from a different perspective and a different way of life. Um, and I think that is the really big difference between them. And the more time will pass, the more you will see that. Because you'll see how this country handles crisis and how this country handles crisis.
Lior, that was a really interesting perspective. I'm still trying to figure out what the Trump plan is because like you said, it's so new and so different that it's difficult to keep track of everything. But yeah, the viewers should comment below in the comment section what they think, and yeah, I think this will be an interview where we could have a good discussion. And with that, Lior, I want to wish you happy holidays and a happy new year.
Thank you.
You're welcome.